Thank you, Mike. Thanks, everyone. Good morning. Mike, again, thanks for putting this on. Kevin, I appreciate the recruiting plug in the Impact Squared portion because it dovetails into some of the topics today. So I've said jokingly that my goal today is not to be invited back. We'll see how that goes during the presentation. Here's the point of today's presentation, today's topic. Every organization needs a strategy that is formalized to address the multi-generational workforce that we have in our organizations. It needs to be a formal strategy. Quinn Hansen, who heads up our executive recruiting division on my team, calls it a playbook, is if we develop a playbook that has scenarios for what are we gonna do to recruit the silent generation, which we'll get into in a second, or recruit the Gen Zs. What does that strategy look like? How do we develop messaging that is going to resonate with the audience? So every article I read in preparation for this broke this into generations. Do I have any HR peeps in the room? Where's my HR people? Yeah, okay, that's great. If you manage people, you're in HR, welcome to the club. So the HR inside of this that I would challenge is it's not a generational conversation. We need to break it down to the individual because when we talk at the generational level, we're talking about characteristics and stereotypes. I'm going to fall into that category today. I'm going to talk about characteristics and stereotypes. But to be effective, we need to break it down to the individual level. So it was fun in preparation for this. I was going back and reading the same presentations in the early 2000s, and it was talking about this new emerging workforce called the millennials. And the values that the millennial had in the early 2000s are identical today. They haven't changed a single bit. They want what the previous generations got plus more. And that's true with every generation. So before we launch into today's topic, the difference is we have 5 generations today. Not 3, not 4, we have 5, and that is going to be the case for decades to come. A couple concepts we talked on last year that will lay the foundation for today. That's right, hello, goodbye, quiet quitting. This were the buzzwords of 2021 and 2022. The reason why I wanted to bring it up today is, as stated last year, it is no different than the prior 3 decades. 30% of the workforce is actively engaged, 20% is actively disengaged, 50% are doing just enough to perform well at their job, not get terminated, and not quit. Nothing has changed. Our sources and data indicate that organizations are listening to this and getting better at it. The next 3 decades, we will be better at employee engagement than the past 3 decades. So the 30, 20, 50 reality that has existed is going to change. Organizations are getting better. Sans Demick, any labor economists? Where's Damon? Damon Runberg, not here today. He'll be at the next event in a month, probably. Sans Demick, this is the workforce drought. It is a labor drought. There's nothing we can do about it. There are 3 things that have happened over the last 50 years that have led us to this day. We've known about it for at least 3 decades as well. 1, baby boomers are retiring at a faster rate than ever before. 2, we have not had birthing rates that can physically replace the number of bodies exiting the workforce. And 3, prime working age men, 25 to 55, have left the traditional full-time workforce at historic volumes. There are lots of reasons why, but everybody in this room has a friend or family member that is doing gig economy that is in this category. So those are the 3 things. We can't do anything about them. Before we get into the challenges, what I want to do is, oh boy, this is going to be interesting. Talk about the generations. So there might be a little technical hiccup with the presentation, and I'll do my best to get through it. We're going to define the 5 generations. We got to get on the same page. Silent generation, born 1927 to 1945, age 78 to 96. Baby boomers, 1946 to 1964, 59 to 77. Gen Xers, I'm a Gen Xer. 65 to 79, ages 44 to 58. Millennials, 1980 to 1994, age 29 to 43. And Gen Zs, born 1995 to 2012, age 11 to 28. Data that you look at might be off by 1 or 2 years on generations. There used to be a Generation Y, but for the most part, these are approximate. Also approximate. How does it relate to Central Oregon? Here are the numbers in Central Oregon. We've got somewhere around less than 2,000 silent Gs working in our workforce today. If you have a silent G on your team, you are so fortunate, so lucky. 27,000 boomers, about 23% of the Central Oregon workforce is in this category. Gen Xers, 37,000 or 31%, millennials, 42,000, 35%, and Gen Zs, 11,000, 9%. If anybody's doing the math, our numbers are 120,000 people in the Central Oregon workforce. This is Lapine to Madras, Sisters to Prineville. It's approximately 52 to 65% of the population for each one of these categories outside of the silent generation. Why is this 120,000 so important for us? Here's why. Every year for the next 10 years, and there's nothing we can do about this, we are going to add 2,000 people to our workforce. Not any more than that. So over the next 10 years, our organizations have the opportunity to acquire 20,000 new employees, and we're all competing for those same 20,000 people. There is nothing we can do to change that. I'm not a labor economist. If there was a labor economist here, he would be nodding his head saying, no, Matt, it's actually 2,100 people per year. I'm trying to keep the numbers simple. We've got an opportunity for 20,000. So we've got to make the best of what we've got. Fortunately, Central Oregon, we have a lot of awesome people thanks to the work that all of the generations prior to us have done to help create an environment where companies and organizations can thrive and workforce can thrive. John Stark at EDCO has done a great job at that, and the other EDCO folks, as with elected officials and organizations here. Okay, let's meet the characteristics. Silent generation. I'm not going to go through this. If I did, it would be a matrix of 20 data points. We don't got time for that. So I'm happy to provide this slide deck to anybody who wants it. Feel free to take pictures of it. But there's a lot of information here. So the silent generation is a generation that has worked their way to the top, and they really are a loyal workforce. They laid the foundation for the baby boomers as well. Baby boomers are highly competitive, very driven. One of the interesting things to put into context is boomers started accumulating assets and wealth in the 1970s and 1980s. Those assets have increased in value over the last 50 years, and this generation is the wealthiest generation that we currently have in retirement, semi-retirement, and in the workforce. Gen X. Again, my generation, in true Gen X form, I put together all my written notes, and yesterday in the office, as I was going through the run-through with my team, one of my millennial team members said, hey, why don't you put that on the Remarkable? And so I put it on the Remarkable last night, and I'm looking at the Remarkable saying, well, what if it fails during my presentation? What am I gonna do? So I've got both up here, again, in true Gen X fashion. We're the first generation to try and converge technology. I'm gonna use this term. It's, I think, authentic, but I don't really like it, in legacy skills of people interaction. Millennials. So I want to make sure that I say this right. This was the first generation that demanded organizations address their why. And so we saw Simon Sinek, catapult to the top of public speaking with his YouTube video on Ask the Why, or Find Out the Why, Address the Why. And it has changed the workforce forever, because every generation after this one will demand the same thing and more. This was the convergence of organizations having to articulate and message the reason why they existed, the values that they had as an organization, and what that led to was value alignment with the millennial workforce, or value misalignment. And the sooner the misalignment gets identified, the faster separation occurs. Gen Z. First full digital generation. They've learned primarily on electronic devices. Every ounce of feedback needs to be delivered instantaneously. Everything needs to happen immediately. Gen Zers, you might remember over years of hearing some of this about Gen Zers, they want to be rewarded and compensated for small projects and big projects alike. So developing strategies for this generation has been challenging with regard to compensation structures. So we're going to get into the challenges now, and I want to remind, I don't think I said this at the beginning, so this is a great time. The point of today's topic, I did say this, is to develop a strategy for each one of these generations within the organization. If you don't have a strategy, it's time to start developing the strategy. Okay, it's the second time I said the point. I'm going to say it one more time. By the end of it, everybody's going to be able to reiterate to me, what was the point of the presentation? Develop a strategy. Got it. Everybody's with me. Here are the challenges. Differing priorities. Every generation has different priorities. More specifically, every individual within that generation has different priorities. We cannot lump the priorities of the baby boomer generation into a category, because everybody within that generation has different priorities. And so the reason why it all gets lumped into the same thing is because we're using stereotypes and assumptions to describe this challenge. I just did it on the previous slide. I called it multi-generational characteristics, right? It's a stereotype. We don't need to sugarcoat it. We're repackaging stereotypes and calling it characteristics. Again, anybody that supervises people or in HR together, and we know that managing people based on stereotypes or a single generation isn't effective, it's not successful, so we've got to find a way to do it at the individual level. Miscommunication, communication, a lot of experts talk about the 3 C's and communication, culture, character. Depending on the subject matter author, the 3 C's can change or evolve, but communication is always one of the C's. So what organizations have discovered is that we've got to identify how our employees want to receive communications. Is it text? Is it emails? Is it in person? Depending on what type of communication it is, could influence what those are. So oftentimes we establish this relationship where we say, how do you prefer to be communicated with? And we get the response, and then we set it up that way. The next step is, okay, I understand that you prefer to be communicated that way. Here's how I prefer to be communicated with as well. So we've got to establish expectations that communication, hopefully, in this relationship is a 2-way communication. And we've got to establish, here's the way I prefer to be communicated with as well, so that the other party knows how to communicate with us. Great example of this. As it relates to context as well. I had a millennial on my team a couple years ago bring to my attention that all of my emails and messages to my team had perfect punctuation with commas and periods. And it came across as rigid in my communications. in that I should throw in an exclamation point as well. So this was in 2021. And so I'm downloading this information, which is like upward management feedback for me, right? And all I can think about is my boss in 2005, when I put an exclamation mark in an email, he walked in and said, "Hey Matt, when you do that, you're yelling. And you can't yell at the audience in an email." And so I had trained myself to use periods and no exclamation marks. And if you do that, now you know that you're in the rigid category with some of the newer generations in our workforce. Us versus them, attitudes. This is the easiest trap to fall into. In fact, the first table topic, that question I had that is not a table topic question was, let's talk about some of the stereotypes that we have for each generation, but it just falls into this trap, and if we let it happen within our organizations, this is contagious. And so the reality is that every individual within each generation has a set of confidence, skills, has insecurities as well, and tapping into the things that people are comfortable with and then finding ways to leverage those across a workforce is the benefit of this diverse workforce that we're all trying to achieve. So creating spaces, or creating projects, or creating opportunities where the collaboration can exist between coworkers and generations within coworkers is oftentimes a low-risk way of trying to build these relationships that otherwise might not exist and get rid of this us versus them attitude. The other thing is all of the needs are shifting. And so as somebody progresses through their career, through their working career, what they needed at one point in time might be different than what they want later. Doesn't mean that their values change. Remember I said the millennial values from the early 2000s have remained consistent throughout the duration of their generation. But what they want and what they need, what they expect has changed. It has absolutely evolved. So all of this is going to change. Okay, retention, recruiting, and management. Silent generation. So if I'm recruiting, if I'm retaining, if I'm managing a silent G, here's what it is. It's in person. I need a strategy that allows me to connect with this individual in person. I need a strategy that allows me to create an environment where this individual can work with coworkers in person, not in a digital environment. Baby boomers. Again, I'm not going to go through every bullet point. We don't have time for it. Baby boomers, face-to-face interaction. Again, this is in person. They're looking for, here I go again, stereotypes. Baby boomers excel most with meaningful projects, mentoring opportunities. If your organization has the ability to craft a mentoring opportunity internally, don't make it the supervisor or the supervisee. That doesn't work, but craft a mentoring program that leverages the skills and experience with some of the more experienced generation with the inexperienced generation. That's highly impactful, and it goes both ways. Every generation loves to learn from the other one. Gen Xers. So again, the first generation to bridge the gap between technology and traditional in-person. We can take feedback and give it digitally or in person. The one thing that's proven true with Gen Xers is we want autonomy in the workplace. A lot of organizations are now led by Gen Xers, and for that reason, we're looking for independent structures. There again, if I'm recruiting, if I'm retaining, if I'm managing Gen Xers, this is the messaging that I want to convey to the audience that I'm working with. This is part of the strategy. Millennials, technology-driven. If I'm hiring a millennial, I need to have an automated process with my onboarding documents. No longer does a manila folder work. I need to talk about this in the recruiting process. If I don't have that today, I need to get it, because in order to retain this individual, there needs to be a platform for quick, immediate feedback to them and digitized performance reviews. The other thing is I've got to start looking at, okay, what are the retirement planning options that exist beyond a traditional 401k, which the baby boomers are totally comfortable with. Now I've got to look at, okay, what does mortgage assistance look like? How are those individuals going to be buying a house? And I've got to start considering how does this fun work-life balance work and different types of time off. So Gen Zers, fully digital, everything has to happen fast with this generation. The Alpha generation or Generation A coming after the Zers are going to demand everything on here. Zers for the first time are demanding mental health, demanding parental leave. Some of this is policy driven, right? So we've got the Oregon paid leave, the paid leave Oregon PLO, that took effect this year. And so everybody who enters the workforce in Oregon from September 1st, 2023 on is going to expect paid leave for bonding time with their kids or their nephew or niece or their friend's kid that they might be taking care of 1 hour a year, right? So these things are here. They're here for good. On the bonding time, there's nothing we can do about it, and most people in the room would agree that it's actually a pretty good thing and pretty cool that we're one of the states to do it first in the country. Really quick, Gen Xers, I didn't touch on this. This generation is the first generation that's going to get sandwiched with childcare. So we're going to have adult children living in the house at the same time that we're going to have our parents living in the house, because the elder care desert hasn't made the headlines yet. But in 4 years, it is the only thing we are going to be talking about, because we've already exhausted the child care desert conversation. And the Gen Xers are going to be forced into a position of caring for adolescent or adult kids at the same time that they're caring for their parents, because there isn't a place for the parents to go, or the cost to do it would deteriorate the assets that were acquired. And millennials and Gen Zers, guess what? That's coming your way too. So, on that positive note, the point of the presentation today is develop a strategy that exists for your organization. We all have different needs. If you don't have a strategy or need help, email me. I will send you the slide deck. Show the slide deck to your employees. Have them develop the strategy. And come up with something that's better than today. So the table topics are intended to start this conversation. What ways does your organization promote knowledge exchange between employees currently? If there's not a formal plan to address that, come up with one. If it means a conversation at the annual picnic or annual Christmas party, that's a great start. What are 3 things your organization does to attract and retain talent from multi-generations? If all I do is post jobs on Indeed, I am not attracting baby boomers. I might not even be attracting some Gen Xers that I want. And then who within the organization is responsible for developing this? If the answer is nobody, then guess what? Today it's you. And then it's you until it's delegated to somebody else. And somebody in the organization will love this conversation, because it's not just about generations, it's again about the individuals. Okay, so that's what I got today, and thank you for your time and attention today.